Hello, thank you for being here. My name is Juliana, and today I'm going to be talking about intercultural competence in music education, which is becoming especially important in recent times when tensions and prejudices are rising, and we are yet unaware of the impact this is having on our current generation, future generations, while we understand what has been happening to previous generations. UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, was created to promote mutual understanding, peace, democracy, and development internationally. In line with these objectives, the organization argues that all living creatures are outcomes of intercultural communication, and that in our current era of globalization, our rapidly changing cultural landscape is characterized by an intensified diversity of people, communities, individuals who live more and more closely together. The key here is diversity. Diversity of identities, cultures, traditions, practices, and as James Banks describes, intersectionality. Here you see the numerous contributions to a person's intersectionality, which are necessary considerations in any multicultural setting. In the United States especially, this is central to many of our challenges and strengths as our communities navigate social, political, historical, and systemic crossroads. This is particularly prominent in issues concerning education, where near future generations of Americans will be increasingly diverse and transnational, and I could argue the same for many other international countries. Pew Research Center illustrates their predicted rate of growth for Asian, Hispanic, Black, and white populations in the US over the next 50 years. They calculate 59 million people emigrating to the United States, and among those people, as well as within each of these population groups, it is imperative to consider the sheer number of cultures, identities, and practices that are and will continue to be represented in these numbers. So let's take the population Hispanic, for example, which you can see is growing at an immense rate. The Census Bureau defines Hispanic, or Latino people, as coming from Cuba, Mexico, Puerto Rico, South or Central America, and other Spanish cultures or origins regardless of race, so basically all of these countries. And obviously, since we're all here, we understand the implications of cultural diversity within music education. But just to illustrate that within the US a little bit further, this is the percent of change in the Hispanic Latino population between 2000 and 2010. The dark blue is where there has been 100% amount of change in that population alone. And you can see that that is completely widespread across the country. Not to mention in the areas where you don't see it as much, that population might already be really present. So as an aside, it's also important to note that given our 2017 political events, it has been reported that border immigration has decreased 40%, and while this might affect incoming migration, some of the prejudices and tensions that gave way to our political situation now remains within our borders, which will be touched on later. But why is this important? The U.S. Department of Education argues that diversity in schools and communities can be a powerful lever leading to positive outcomes in school and in life. Racial and socioeconomic diversity benefits communities, schools, and children from all backgrounds. Today's students need to be prepared to succeed with a more diverse and more global workforce than ever before. All students can benefit from instruction that builds on their experiences and improves cultural competency. How then do our students develop these competencies and learn to orient themselves with each other in an increasingly diverse setting locally, nationally, and then internationally? the field of intercultural competence as a resource for music education may hold the key. In a 2013 document detailing the purpose and procedures of intercultural competence, UNESCO loosely defines it as the abilities to adeptly navigate complex environments marked by a growing diversity of peoples, cultures, and lifestyles. So in order to understand how this happens, however, it's important to understand the history of this separate field. With this in mind, the field of research began in the mid-20th century, stemming out of anthropology and sociology, as the US government realized that people traveling outside the US were lacking certain necessary skills to communicate and integrate effectively in international travel. After all, they were representing the US government, and this emerged at the toes of the civil rights movement, where issues of culture, identity, respect, and understanding were becoming increasingly important. This quickly poured into academia, where higher education institutions were sending students abroad, as well as hosting international students, and departments that dealt with ethnic studies, culture, psychology, philosophy, and art recognized the importance of their students knowing how to navigate culture shock, life in another culture, and then re-entry adjustment. With the advent of technology and media, and then increased globalization, major businesses faced similar issues with employees traveling and conducting business internationally, having come from a dominant Western society with ethnocentric tendencies. These employees posed a problem. Their ability to interact effectively and responsibly with people in other cultures fell short. Consequently, millions of dollars has been poured into the development of assessment tools and training resources and analyses for businesses to be able to measure their employees' intercultural competencies before international and intercultural communication, and then provide adequate training so that their employees represent their businesses adequately. This is a multi-million-dollar industry with research and training being performed across the globe. You can find this in iterations in Brazil, in Chile, in Korea, in South Africa. You find it everywhere because even though sometimes Americans think that we're the center of everything, there are many countries who have to interact together, and there are culture barriers that need to be crossed, and not everyone knows how to do that. That's what the training is for. That's what this multi-million dollar, if not billion-dollar industry pours its money into. And then more recently, it's trickled into general education among primary schools and secondary schools, with research being really focused on teacher intercultural competence, seeing as how most of the assessment tools and models are geared towards adults. There are none that exist yet for children specifically. Milton Bennett, one of the scholars responsible for designing the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity, a model that laid the groundwork for the field, argues that intercultural sensitivity is not natural. Education and training in intercultural communication is an approach to changing our natural behavior. With the concepts and skills developed in this field, we ask learners to transcend traditional ethnocentrisms and to explore new relationships across cultural boundaries. So how does intercultural competence work? Like other disciplines, there are multiple models and theories available. Many people disagree, many people agree, and then they have their own shoot-offs and it spreads. But there are two prominent models and theories that reign above all others. The first is by Fantini, which illustrates the relationship between four major components, that of attitude, skills, knowledge, which intermingle and drive together towards the core of awareness. The three interrelated areas are the ability to establish and maintain relationships, the ability to communicate with minimal loss or distortion, and the ability to cooperate to accomplish tasks of mutual interest or need. This pinwheel arrangement illustrates that the first three dimensions promote enhanced awareness, fostered through introspection and reflection, while enhanced awareness in turn stimulates development of the other three dimensions. Darla Deerdorf, in her 2006 dissertation, performed a grounded theory analysis in which 23 intercultural experts participated, resulting in the first research study to document consensus among these leading intercultural experts on a definition and major components because of the disparity between the disagreements of different models and components and assessment tools. The first pyramid model here demonstrates the foundation of attitudes, knowledge, and skills that work to enhance the upper levels of desired internal and external outcomes. Within each box is a list of different important tenets that contribute to the development of that specific competency. This process model, which accompanies the other, illustrates the flow of external experiences and information through the different tenets of attitudes, knowledge, and skills, in through desired internal, external outcomes, and like in the other model, cycling back through the process to reinform each piece. Deerdorf explains that the model envisions a simultaneous interactional process that feeds back into itself almost at all levels, all the time, but also anticipates several specific sequential causal paths, as you can see the arrows, which, as she argues, have the advantage of a relatively easy adaptation to research purposes and further development in the field. So she's really trying to think ahead for other people who are going to try to build onto this. So, as mentioned, an outcome of Deerdorf's investigation into the consensus within the field created the first widely accepted definition, which is the appropriate and effective management of interaction between people who, to some degree or another, represent different or divergent affective, cognitive, and behavioral orientations to the world. These orientations will most commonly be reflected in such normative categories as was organized in Banks's chart of intersectionality. To a large extent, therefore, intercultural interaction is tantamount to intergroup interaction. It is important to point out, however, that groups do not interact, individuals interact within groups. She continues by adding that the extent to which individuals manifest aspects of or are influenced by their group or cultural affiliations and characteristics is what makes an interaction an intercultural process. So how is this different than other theories and terminology that is more widely used in music education scholarship? Huub Schippers, in his book Facing the Music, admits that within discourse on cultural diversity in music education terminology is often loosely defined with a wide range of meanings for terms like multicultural, intercultural, cross-cultural, transcultural, bicultural. There's a whole list of terminology that people use interchangeably, not necessarily operational. You understand what I'm trying to say. So these are applied in conjunction with reference to ethnic, world, migrant, or minority arts, often without defining specific meanings or relations, real or assumed. Even Therese Volk, in her book Music Education and Multiculturalism, details an extensive history of music education in the US and internationally, with waves of terminology and emphasis that goes back and forth from people using intercultural to multicultural to intercultural to multicultural, with trends kind of seesawing starting in the 1920s. Definitions and purposes were often similar, but again, loosely defined. Even with theories like Banks's multicultural education, where he argues that a transformative multicultural curriculum should foster students' abilities to know, care, and act appropriately with people of various cultures, which I should add is nearly identical to the three components in intercultural competence of knowledge, skills, and attitude. There is significant emphasis on how to develop knowledge, but little on the development of caring and acting. And in fact, much research in music education talks about the knowledge part, but not as much of the other more socio-emotional parts. That is, the techniques for transforming all three qualities is not explicitly delineated, nor is the way to determine how and where these students are along the path to transformation in order to be able to impose, what's the word I'm looking for? It starts with an I. Interventions. There we go. So it is beyond the time limits of this presentation to specify what could be an entire dissertation on the difference between the terms multicultural and intercultural. There's a significant amount of research and discussion in music education, as well as other fields regarding this distinction. Anyone that's interested, you can email me, I'll send you a whole list. But moving on, for my purposes, I would like to argue that the field of intercultural competence transcends this discussion because of its extensive and well-established history of research in competency development through multiple disciplines by way of widely accepted models and extensively validated assessment instruments and methods that cover a wide range of competencies rather than more theoretical discussions or analyses of specific individual competencies, as has been found in a lot of music education research, which comes back in that conversation about theory to practice, practice to theory. How do we have all these theories and then enact the practice being informed by the theory? So we've seen a few models that demonstrate the flow of external information and experiences through knowledge, skills, and attitude, leading into heightened awareness exercise as internal and external outcomes. And while research in intercultural competence functions predominantly on these main components, there are certain qualities that are prioritized along the path of a person's intercultural competence development. The attributes most commonly cited and sustained in the literature that flow and function interchangeably between those three major components are empathy, curiosity, tolerance, openness, patience, flexibility, and suspending judgment. All qualities I think we would all agree are important and we would want our children to embody, especially in a multicultural setting. Similarly, Deardorff lists these skills and competencies: respect, self-awareness, and understanding of self-identity, seeing other worldviews, listening, adaptation, relationship building, and cultural humility as the minimum requirements to attain intercultural competence, and therefore, additionally, the goals. In essence, intercultural competence is the ability to interact effectively and responsibly with others as well as internally within ourselves, while constantly being in flux along a spectrum of ethnocentrism to ethno-relativism, being able to, relate to others versus being really stuck within our own dominant culture. UNESCO argues that schools are a central place to nurture such skills and abilities, which gives us music educators the perfect opportunity. Music education researchers have examined quite a few of these qualities and their relationship to music involvement and/or consumption. Empathy, for example, has received a fair amount of attention, with these representing a mere fraction of the published resources. In a recently published article by Leuven in 2016, Hargrave's concept of open-earedness is explored within the literature. He argues that Hargraves set off a firestorm of ambiguity when he used the term without operationalization, which led many scholars after him to explore it within the context of subdisciplines in music, most notably in music preference development. He states that the concept still lacks an elaborated definition and an empirical operationalization that is consistently deduced from this definition. Thus, it remains unclear what exactly open-earedness means and how it can be measured in a valid way. And after a thorough literature review and analysis, more than a dozen, if not 24 sources that were discussing open-earedness in music education and consumption, he found that scholars were really looking at broader terms of openness, open-mindedness, curiosity, tolerance, and acceptance as the goal of what they were trying to examine, being representative through the music, or the music representing a greater interaction process. Here's another fraction of research done in identity. Social and individual, gender, ethnic, cultural, class, and musical identity in music research. And there's even more of a ridiculous number of research done on this, which is really important. I have 2 slides. Oh, there we go. So there are 2 slides. Okay. And then if we look back at some of the tenets and minimum requirements of intercultural competence, we can see that there has been research in music and music education regarding many of these, some of which we have covered in this presentation. So many more that I just could not fit because of the time restriction, but much of the research has centered around diverse musics, and we still have some ways to go when it comes to some research in music cognition, psychology, and sociology in terms of broadening our empirical methods and the music that is used to understand how we interact with people, traditions, and ideas of other cultures. So in conclusion, I argue that IC, intercultural competence, offers the possibility to identifying competencies that are already present and common part of music education that feeds our common goals and researchers in music education, and especially cultural diversity, toward a more understanding and unified global world music, if not world at large. There are correlations between these qualities mentioned that are a part of music and result of music that are inherently and regularly observable in the music classroom. You can see in even this small collection of studies mentioned that these little outcomes bubble up, and what IC offers is a larger framework in which to interpret those. They have been reported in isolation, and this is a way we can conceptualize them more holistically. I had the rest of it, but I won't read that because I'm done. Basically, I think that this is a great opportunity for us to take all these different findings that we are doing independently within music education that is along the foundations of social emotional development, and to use it as a framework, model, assessment method within music education. And I'm developing currently a assessment tool for children to see if that is an opportunity to look into curriculum development, teacher training, and the like.